the Seder, there are certain mitzvahs that are deraisa, that are biblical obligations. There are certain mitzvahs that are midrabanan, rabbinic obligations. So I think we should assume that the biblical obligations are most important. Right? Those include eating the matzah and Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, telling the story. The mitzvahs d'Rabbanan involve the Dalet Kosos, the recitation of Hallel, the eating of the Mor. Those are probably of secondary importance. But I think the most important thing about the Seder is to give us some thought beforehand. If you're conducting the Seder especially, in other words, how is this going to be meaningful to the audience of people who are in attendance? I can't speak for all families, but it seems to be anecdotally, I get the impression that often the Seder does not live up to its promise. As people are hoping to really get something out of it, and we get bogged down in the side issues. The seating is one of them. So everyone gets seated, especially if it's a large group. He wants to sit next to him, and she wants to sit next to him, and sit there, and these two people don't get along, and so on and so forth. So that itself will take an hour. And I hate to be like the Grinch that stole Pesach, but it's nice to have the kids ask the Manashtana, but I think that could be overdone too. If you're dealing with a child who really is too young to understand what's going on, and somehow you just train him to say the Manashtana, I don't know if that's a nice thing to do, but I don't think that should become the center, the focus of the Seder. And of course, the difficulty with many starim is you're dealing with an audience which there's a range of ages. You have very young children, you have teenagers, you have adults, maybe older people. And how do you make the Seder something which is, so to speak, shava b'chol nefesh, something that everyone can appreciate? It's easier said than done. And then what parts of the Seder do you emphasize? What parts do you not emphasize? What do you explain? What do you take for granted? They're all difficult things. I think that you have to give it some thought going in. On the other hand, you also want it to be a little bit spontaneous. In other words, if discussion goes into uncharted territory, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That may be an opportunity for some real discoveries. So it's quite a complex thing to juggle the Seder. Probably the best advice I can give is take a good nap before the Seder, so you'll be alert. People that go into the Seder are exhausted and their nerves are frazzled. Often will sleep through the Seder, and that's not good for anybody. So a good long nap is probably the best advice you can give. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Shavuot.
Can I ask one question about the Seder?
Sure.
The Magid, which is obviously a critical part of the Seder, is a formula. In the sense that most Haggadahs have the same Magid.
All real Haggadahs have the same Magid. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
I'm not talking about the feminist Haggadah or the labor unionist Haggadah or the...
Right. Okay. So the Haggadah has a Magid. Right? How exacting do you have to be to stay with that Magid in terms of discussion, in terms of moving through it? Many people are not going to understand it in Hebrew, and it's such an important part of the Seder to say it in a language people don't understand. And then if you say it translated, the translations are different from Haggadah to Haggadah.
Well, probably if you're dealing with an audience that doesn't have the Hebrew, it might be worthwhile to have the same Haggadah for everybody. It's a standard translation.
Right.
At least this way, You're not getting bogged down in the minor differences in the translation. And you can do it in English. There are parts that are more important, parts that are less important. In other words, in the structure of Magid, there is a little bit of which is devoted not to the story of the Yetzias Mitzrayim itself, but a discussion of the mitzvah of discussing the Yetzias Mitzrayim.
Right.
So, for example, you'll talk about the 4 sons and how they're to be instructed, and Yochum Rishchedech talks at the proper time, and the Kol HaMaborim HaShibbuch, whoever does it abundantly is praiseworthy of the story of the sages, how they had the Seder Bnei Brak went the entire night. I mean, that's the least important part of the Seder. But it's not talking about the story itself. The part that talks about the story itself really begins with the paragraph Matchila Evdei V'Dizar Hayal Esein. And you have to understand the way it works. The way it works essentially is that there are statements that are made, and there are proof texts that are brought, and a little bit later it's the several verses that are invoked to discuss the Exodus are analyzed. So each verse is broken down to its component words or phrases, and each of those is explained, and that's the vehicle for the telling of the story. Sometimes I think that if I was conducting a Seder, what I'd really rather have than a Haggadah in front of each participant is to have a large flip chart where I could point to the particular word we're talking about, and that wouldn't be hard to do. Might be an idea. The Hebrew is not that important, but the content is fairly important. Okay, someone mentioned talk about Shavuos, so we'll talk a little bit about Shavuos. Right? We know that Pesach is really the beginning of a period of the year called Sfiras HaOmer, the counting of the Omer, which tells us that Pesach is not merely an event, but it's the beginning of a series of events. And starting from the second day of Pesach, we start counting the Omer, 49 days, 7 weeks. And we count up. Today is the first day, today is the second day, today is the third day, until the 49th day. Today is the 49th day, which is 7 complete weeks to the Omer. And then we enter into Shavuos. So what is the idea of this counting? Well, obviously it's to connect in some way Pesach to Shavuos. And that's because the immediate objective of the Yetzias Mitzrayim, the immediate objective of the redemption from Egypt, was to receive the Torah at Mount Sinai. That's the immediate objective. So the Yetzias Mitzrayim is not an end in itself. It is only the means to the greater end of becoming God's nation. And that, of course, took place at Har Sinai. There are several questions on this. Number one, why did we start counting only from the second day of Pesach? Because if we're trying to connect the Yetzias Mitzrayim to the giving of the Torah, we should really count from the first day of Pesach. So to that, the Sefer HaChinuch gives an answer. Not a totally satisfying answer. He says, because if we count from the first day of Pesach, that would show a lack of appreciation for what happened on that day, as if it's only a stepping stone to the next event. So we want to savor the day of liberation. So we don't treat that day as merely the first of a series. We start counting the day after. That's Sefer HaChinuch's interpretation. But a more serious problem is that if you look in the Chumash doesn't give you the impression that we're coming to connect the historical events to each other. We're not connecting the Exodus to the giving of the Torah. We're not even connecting the holiday of Pesach to the holiday of Shavuos. We're connecting two sacrifices. In the temple, on the second day of Pesach, there was a sacrifice brought from the newly harvested barley called the Karban HaOmer. Second day of Pesach. This was harvested the second night of Pesach. Remember, in Eretz Yisrael, there's only one day of Yom Tov. So after that first day of Yom Tov, at night, they would harvest a certain amount of barley, and they would bring it the next day as an offering. It's called the Karban HaOmer, the newly harvested barley, the newly grown barley.
The wheat itself, not the product
barley.
of the wheat. Or sorry, the barley itself.
Right.
But not a loaf of barley or anything.
No, it was, the kernels were roasted and ground into flour, and it was brought as a sacrifice. And then, on Shavuos, there is a offering of the new wheat. But the new wheat was, again, harvested and made into two loaves, called the Shtei HaLachem, and these loaves were brought along with animal sacrifices. The loaves ultimately were eaten by the priests. And this is a sacrifice that's brought on Shavuos. And if you look in the Chumash says that you count from the day that you brought the Karban HaOmer, you count 49 days, and on the 50th day, you bring an offering of the new wheat. So the connection really is not so much a connection between the holiday of Pesach and the holiday of Shavuos, and not the historical event of Yetzias Mitzrayim and the historical event of the giving of the Torah. Rather, it's a connection between the two sacrifices, the sacrifice of the new barley and the sacrifice of the new wheat. And the question is, like, what is the significance of this? Let me go back to the first question and share with you a thought which is said by the Kedushas Levi, the Roditchever. Says the idea is as follows. Now, Pesach, the Seder night, is a time of tremendous enlightenment. I don't know if we appreciate it, because our antenna may not be tuned to the proper frequencies. But it's a time of tremendous spiritual enlightenment. A person who is sensitive and can pick up the broadcast can become tremendously uplifted and inspired and enlightened on the night of the Seder, perhaps more than any other day of the year. And maybe just by way of introduction, let me mention something that the Ramchal speaks about in the Sefer Derech Hashem, which is that we have to know, this is very important, that not every day of the year is the same as any other day of the year, and not every place is the same as every other place in the world. Or there are times and places which are uniquely auspicious for receiving spiritual bounty. So, for example, we know that a Shabbos is different than a weekday. A Yom Tov is different than a Shabbos. Yom Tovim are different from one another. There's a certain spirit of Pesach, a certain spirit of Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Purim. Every day is different. And what you can achieve on one day is not what you can achieve on another day. Even within times of day, there are differences. Day has its charm, night has its charm. What you can achieve by day, you can't achieve at night. Al Pi Kabbalah, day is for Torah Shebechsav. You can learn the written Torah. Night is for Torah Sheba'al Peh, for the oral Torah. Whatever that means. But different days of the year, different times of the day, places are certainly that way. Because we understand that what a person can achieve in Toronto is not the same that a person can achieve in Eretz Yisrael. And even within Eretz Yisrael, there's no comparison between Yerushalayim and every other place. And even within Yerushalayim, the place of the Beis Hamikdash, the place of the temple had unique holiness. And even within the temple, the place of the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh HaKadoshim, was especially so. So the type of spiritual attainments that a person can achieve in different places, different times, are noteworthy differences. the first night of Pesach is unique. And perhaps it is unparalleled. There's no other night of the year that a person can acquire and achieve as much. And the mystic speaks of the great iris, the great lights that shine on the Seder night. But one interesting thing about these lights is that they are provided to us gratis. In other words, not through our own effort. We did not work for them, we did not necessarily prepare for them. I mean, we prepare in a sense. But whatever preparation we make, for the most part, is really in really setting the tone for the evening, or preparing the setting itself. As we clean the house, we remove the chametz, we buy the foods, etc. But in pure intellectual and spiritual senses, there's very little we can do to prepare for the tremendous inspiration that comes this night. Needless to say, something which is handed to you in a silver platter is not really yours, because you don't feel the connection to it. You don't feel that it's a possession of your own. So the mystics tell us that an amazing thing happens, that when the second day of Pesach comes, all this is lost. These iris, these lights, are given to you for one day. But after that it's lost. But you have the ability to reclaim it. And we can reclaim it through the effort that we exert during the days of counting the Omer. The days of counting the Omer also are auspicious. These are days wherein we can reclaim the spiritual attainments of the first day of Pesach. But this time, they're truly ours. Because if we merit and we work hard, we will regain those lights. But since they'll be a function of our effort, of our labor, they'll truly be our own. They'll be a kin, they'll be a true possession. Yes?
That would be really easy to understand in Israel. But here, the second night of Pesach is still a major joyous event. You don't feel like you've fallen.
This is a broad discussion. How do we reconcile the observance of the second day of Yom Tov with the reality that it's not the second day of Yom Tov? I mean, that could be a discussion for another time.
Well, I'm just speaking specifically about Pesach. General.
Yeah. Let's just speak with the Torah, the scheme of it in the Torah, which is one day of Pesach and the assignment. Okay. Now let me give you a marshal. I've used this illustration before. Now you have people that become Sabbath observers. They become Shomerei Shabbos. So usually, how does this begin? This begins with a person having an experience of Shabbos. Well, this could be a person who's never had a Shabbos before, who's a totally secular person, but somehow a Sabbath observer befriends him and invites him to come. So he drives up a little bit before Shabbos, and he enters a world which is totally foreign. And what an experience it is. A spirit of serenity, of spirituality, peace, harmony. The family, everyone is so beautifully dressed and scrubbed, clean, and the table is set so elegantly, and the food is so delicious, and the discussion is so scintillating, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful experience. The person's first Shabbos. And Shabbos is over, and that's it. Shabbos is over. So he thinks to himself that, now I would like to bring this into my own life. I'd like to bring this into my own life. But that's easier said than done. But imagine this Jew trying to observe his first Shabbos on his own. And the phone is ringing off the hook, and his boss is calling, and he has all sorts of unfinished work that has to be done. There are deadlines to meet, And needless to say, he's not familiar with all the procedures that have to be instituted in the home to do everything just the right way to avoid the violation of Shabbos. It's not easy. And probably his first independent Shabbos will be a far cry from that magnificent Shabbos he spent with the family the week before. But with practice, it gets better, it gets better, it gets better. The second week is better than the first, and the third is better than the second, and after a few months he's gotten the hang of it. And then he has the Shabbos, which is virtually identical to that Shabbos he experienced months before. But there's a big difference. That Shabbos was a wonderful experience, but it wasn't a function of his own effort. It wasn't really a kinyan, it wasn't a possession. It was handed to him on a silver platter. It says now, through his effort, through his toil, he has a Shabbos which is truly his. He has overcome all the obstacles, and he's created this island of peace and serenity and spirituality in his own home. It's a kinyan. It's actually his Shabbos. It belongs to him. And that makes all the difference in the world. Something that you've worked for, something you've created, is something you take pride in. It's something that you can, in turn, transmit to others. It's something that you won't so readily give up. You know, something which is handed to you, easy come, easy go. But once you've labored and worked and you've achieved it, it has a certain connection to you. This is something which is important. You're not going to just squander that for no reason. And that's the difference between Pesach and Shavuos. Pesach, the first night of Pesach, we have these tremendous oiros, these tremendous lights, illumination, spiritual abundance. But it's handed to us. And beginning with the second day of Pesach, we have to engage in that work of reclamation. But if we are successful, when Shavuos arrives, we have those same lights, those same elements of inspiration. But by this time, we've earned them, we've created them, and therefore they're truly ours. Therefore, since the B'ditchever, that's why we really start counting from the second day of Pesach. In other words, the counting of the Omer is counting off the days of reclamation. The first day doesn't count. That's the day that we had it all. And by the way, this is also the reason we count up as opposed to counting down. The Sefer Achim is also bothered by this, because many people think the idea of the counting is really like a countdown, breathless anticipation until the day of the giving of the Torah. So we should count down, just like Lahavdil, to draw an analogy. People count down to Christmas. They say 30 shopping days left, 29 shopping days left, 5 shopping days left, 4, 1! Right? Or when a rocket takes off, T-minus 10 seconds, 9, 8, 7, we have ignition. And we have liftoff. Space Shuttle Columbia is on its way. So we count down. That's when you're talking about anticipation. So you can't wait, you're counting down. But here, it's not so much anticipation. We are laying foundations. So the first day we lay down the first layer of bricks. The second day we build on top of that. The third day we build on top of the first 2 layers. The fourth day on top of the first 3 layers. Every day we're adding another layer to this structure that we're building. So of course you count up. We're not just counting time. We are building up in our spiritual ascent. Therefore naturally you count up. That's a very interesting thing. And I think we should apply this to this verse. It says when Yaakov Avinu made the deal with his father-in-law Lavan that he would work 7 years to marry Rachel, it says Vayiyu be'einav kiyamim achadim, that the 7 years appeared to him like several days, ba'ahavasu also, because of his great love for her. So the question everyone asks is, the contrary. If you really loved her so much, wanted to marry her, those 7 years should have seemed like an eternity. Well, it was like a few days. See, the difference is like this, right? Let me give you an illustration to understand it. Let's say you're in high school, and they tell you, okay, in 1 month is graduation. You'll be free. You can do what you want, go where you want, etc. You'll have your diploma in hand. 1 month. So if you're just waiting, that month will seem like forever, because you're waiting for that goal, and you're waiting, very, very difficult. But let's say, for example, that I was to tell you that in this month, you have 1 month to graduation, but in this month you have to take an exam on everything you've covered in your 4 years of high school. We're going to test you on English and on science and math and here in Canada, Canadian history, Canadian geography, some French, civics, all the courses you have to take in high school. So you think, wow, that's a tall order. I'm going to be tested on everything. I'll make all the difference, because if I pass, then I can go on to university. I can ultimately become a professional. If I fail, that's it. That's the end of my educational career right there. So during that month, the person who's to be studying his head off. What will it seem to him? Will it seem to him like a long time? It's only a very short time. Very short time. There's so much to do. It's a little time to do it. It was when Yaakov Avinu was preparing to marry Rachel, he was preparing himself. He was preparing himself to be worthy for her. He loved her very much, and he felt that she deserved someone very, very special. So these 7 years were not just passing the time, watching the clock, because he was preparing himself. It seemed to him like a very short time. 7 years. 7 years. All the preparations I need to do, I'm going to have to fit into the 7 short years. That's very difficult. Very difficult. And I think we have to look at that way when it comes to Shavuos. In other words, the spirit of Shavuos shouldn't be breathless anticipation. I can't wait for a Matan Torah. Halavai, we should look so forward to Matan Torah that we should have even that. That's not the idea. The idea should be the opposite. The idea is that we're preparing ourselves. We're making ourselves fit to receive the Torah. And so we say 49 days, that's it. There's so much to do, so little time to do it. We have to prepare. And we get close to that time off to talk about this, how to take the days of Sefirah seriously to really work one's way up from Pesach to Shavuot. That's what it's all about. And therefore, we count up. We count up. So we've answered some of the questions. Why we start from the second day, why we count up and not down. Let's look at the sacrifices. The sacrifices of the new barley and the new wheat. Now there's some interesting things about these sacrifices. Let me tell you some of the halachas, some of the laws that underlie these. The rule is, in Eretz Yisrael, that the new grain is prohibited for human consumption until the Korban HaOmer is brought. When the Korban HaOmer is brought the second day of Pesach, then human beings, Jews of course, obviously, are allowed to eat the new grain.
Which new grain?
All the grains. Because when that sacrifice of barley is brought, all grain, wheat as well, becomes permitted.
So there have been harvests that have happened prior to...
No, they haven't harvested. From that time onward, you can harvest and eat. The Omer is the first thing which is harvested. And after that, you can harvest and eat the new grain. However, it cannot be brought as a sacrifice in the temple until after the sacrifice of the new wheat is brought Shavuos in the Beis HaMikdash. So the new grain can be eaten by the people, but to be brought as a sacrifice, it can't be brought until the shtei halachem are brought on Shavuos.
What's brought prior to that? When they have to bring grain?
All the sacrifices in the temple were brought from the year before grain.
And one last question: when does that year before end? Like, when is the new grain considered new grain?
In other words, we're saying that grain which took root before the Karban HaOmer only becomes permitted with the Karban HaOmer, and in the Beis HaMikdash only after the Shtei HaLachem. Okay? This is the prohibition of Chodesh, of new grain. So the first thing to understand is it's a very bizarre thing that I should be allowed to eat it, but I can't bring it as a sacrifice. We'd always think the opposite, that perhaps there should be more restrictions on my consumption than on the temple's consumption. Here we say, I can eat it, but God can't eat it. Can't give it to him until after we jump through another hoop. Hard to understand. Okay, keep that in mind. Another difference, of course, between two sacrifices is that the first sacrifice is brought from barley, and the second is brought from wheat. Also a very strange thing. In the symbolism of the Talmud, barley is called animal food. Barley is maichel behema. It's animal food. What do we do with barley in America? Make beer out of it. Assuming animal food. With a different sort. But barley was eaten by animals. Wheat was considered human food. So again, we have to account for that difference. Like, what is the idea that on the second day of Pesach we eat animal food, or we bring animal food as a sacrifice, and on Shavuos we bring human food as a sacrifice? How do they explain that? Second, there's another idea, which is that the barley that was brought for the Karban HaOmer was unleavened, not chametz. It wasn't allowed to rise or become fermented. Whereas the shtei halachem, the wheat offering on Shavuos, was made into loaves that were chametz. It was leavened, which is very, very noteworthy. As a rule, leavened bread was not brought in the temple. Only certain exceptions. This is one of them. Now, there's a consequence of this. That of the Karban HaOmer, part of it was burnt on the altar. Now, if you learned the parsha last week, you know that when a flour offering is brought, so the flour is brought to the temple in a bowl, the Kohen takes a handful and burns it on the altar. But that's only permitted if it is unleavened. If it's leavened, no part of a leavened offering can be brought on the altar. So from the Shtei HaLachem on Shavuos, nothing is burnt on the altar. The entire thing, 100%, is eaten by the priests. That's also a difference which is noteworthy. Let me show you the Mishnah Pirkei Avos. Mishnah Pirkei Avos says like this: Im ein kamach, ein Torah. If there's no flour, there's no Torah. Im ein Torah, ein kamach. If there's no Torah, there's no flour. Meaning, unless you have some
wheat flour.
Kemach means flour, right? But the point here is not flour. You don't need flour; you need food. If you have no sustenance, if you have no means of support, you have nothing from which to feed yourself, you're not going to be able to study Torah or observe Torah. In other words, a person who thinks that I can live on fumes, and be a Torah observant Jew, is deluding himself. If there's no flour, meaning if there's no sustenance, then there's no Torah. But on the other hand, if there's no Torah, there's no sustenance. What makes us deserving of sustenance? What makes us deserving of God's support? Our observance of Torah, our learning of Torah. So in Torah and Kamach. So it's a two-way street. In Kamach, if there's no flour, there's no Torah. But if there's no Torah, there's no flour. So how do you start? In other words, if Torah is the necessary condition to getting flour, and flour is the necessary condition to studying Torah, so how do you start? How do you kick off? Well, the answer is like this. Again, an illustration. Let's say you're a manufacturer, and you hire a salesman to go on the road. And the deal is the salesman is being paid by commission. But you get a percentage of whatever you sell. So how does he cover his startup costs? He hasn't earned anything yet. What's the answer? The boss gives him an advance against his commission. In other words, undoubtedly you'll sell something, so I'll give you an advance now, whatever, a few $1,000s. This way you get yourself set up. You need to get a car, you need to get whatever you need. And a computer. I don't know what salad salesmen use nowadays, but you'll get what you need, and we'll give you a credit, and it'll be taken off your commission. So it's true that it's the Torah that makes us deserving of Kemach. But if the Rebbe has to give us an advance. So the Kemach, which we receive in advance, is in a sense, unearned. We haven't earned it yet. It's an advance to enable us to earn it. The Kemach, which we receive after the Torah, that's the Kemach that we truly earned. As I think that when we talk about this idea of Chadash, the new grain in Eretz Yisrael, that is, every year there's a gift of grain. Well, there's an agricultural cycle. Every year we farm, we plow, we plant, we harvest. There's a gift of grain that God gives us every year. What makes us deserving? The Torah. When do we receive the Torah? Shavuot. We can't begin to become deserving until after Shavuot. Right? That's when, through our commitment, through our acceptance of Torah, we become deserving of God's bounty. But how do we prepare for Shavuot? We get in advance. Now, whenever we receive something from God, we have to thank God. It's only appropriate. You receive a gift, you have to thank God. So my conjecture is like this, that the second day of Pesach, we receive in advance. This is when Chadash, when the new grain becomes permitted for human consumption. We bring a sacrifice, the Korban Omer. This is how we thank God for the advance that God has given us. Okay? Now, let's think about this for a second. If I'm giving you an advance which you haven't earned, it's probably appropriate that you shouldn't overdo it. I mean, you haven't earned it yet. You should be mitzamtzem, as the word goes. You should limit yourself. Don't overdo it. Take what you need. Don't overindulge. It's only in advance. And by the way, it's wise advice for the traveling salesman too. In other words, if he's going to have this deducted from his commission and he doesn't know how much he's going to end up earning, he certainly doesn't want to take too much. And it's very interesting. So when we give our sacrifice to thank God, presumably we are giving from what He has given us. In other words, we give back a portion of what He's given us. So what do we give Him? We give Him unleavened barley. As if to say, this is what we received. We received unleavened barley. Now this is minimal in two different ways. First of all, it's really animal food. I mean, it's fit for human consumption, but it isn't the type of thing that they write restaurant reviews about in the New York Times. But it's good enough. You can live on barley. And it's not even leavened. And we know the difference between something leavened and something unleavened. There's a big difference. Something which is leavened, bread, fluffy, soft, it's a pleasure to eat. Matzah is hard, it's tough to take, hard on the system. That's what we receive from God. This is our advance. And therefore we give it back to Him, give a portion back to Him. But we have to give a portion back to Him. There has to be a portion burnt on the altar. Because what He's giving us is a gift. We have to acknowledge that. Also interesting that at this point you can't bring it as a sacrifice to the temple. You know, if you have a job and you earn money, you can spend it however you want. If you want to give donations to the shul, do whatever you want. But if you're my child, I give you an allowance, and the allowance is given to you for a purpose, so you have no right to give it to charity or do mitzvahs with it or give it to the temple. You have to use it for what it was given you. And then that's the idea that the chadash, which we receive in the second day of Pesach, this is God's advance to us. So it's given to us in order to get ourselves jump-started, to be able to prepare to receive the Torah. So we can't take that and give sacrifices from it, give it to the temple. That's not what it was given to us for. It was given to us for us to prepare ourselves for Shavuot. Shavuot is a different story. Shavuot, with our acceptance of the Torah, we become deserving of God's bounty. So now we enjoy it in its full richness. It's wheat, not barley. It's leavened. And we can do what we want with it, because we've earned it. We can even use it to bring sacrifices in the temple. So what we really have over here is like this. What we have is, in the transition from the carbon ha'omer to the shtei halachem, we have a situation that God has given us in advance to get us started, but really we only become truly deserving through our Kabbalah Satorah on Shavuot. And the truth is, this is really a reiteration of a truth that was applicable at the very, very beginning of Jewish history. When Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to God at the burning bush and questioned God that how am I going to be given this mission to take the Jews out of Mitzrayim, and Rashi understands that the question was, are the Jews truly deserving of redemption? So God says, this is the sign that I truly sent you, that when you leave Egypt, you will worship God at this mountain. Now the question that Moshe was asking is, are the Jews deserving of redemption? And God says, yes, they're going to be deserving. Because when they come out of Egypt, they will serve God at this mountain. Meaning that the Yetzias Mitzrayim was not for merits that already had accrued. It was given on credit. The Yetzias Mitzrayim was in advance. God said, I won't take a chance on you. And 7 weeks after the Yetzias Mitzrayim, Jews will worship God on this mountain. They'll accept the Torah. And that justifies the Yetzias Mitzrayim 7 weeks before. And that's exactly what it is for each and every one of us. In other words, we experience Pesach, but the purpose of Pesach is really only to lead us to Shavuot, and therefore we're given in advance. That's the carbon ha'omer, that's the chadash. We're given in advance to get ourselves started. A minimal sustenance to be able to go through these 7 weeks. When do we become truly deserving of God's bounty? Shavuot, with our acceptance of Torah. So we have to understand that in our observance of Pesach, Pesach has to look forward to Mount Torah. In other words, when we think of the liberation from Mitzrayim, we think of being freed. Freedom does not mean freedom from constraints alone. It's not the only thing it means. It means freedom to devote oneself to a higher purpose. And that means freedom to be God's servants, to be makabel His Torah, to study His Torah, to observe His Torah. And I think that has to be the real message we have to transmit at the Seder. You know, the Seder is a glorious evening, but we have to see it as the first step in a process, and what it is leading to is becoming God's people, accepting His Torah, and living accordingly. Rishonim tell us that the idea of being servants to Paro might have been only for this purpose. The Hashem says, others say it, that we have to be servants to God. What does it mean to be a servant? Who wants to be a servant? But HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the experience of being servants to Paro. Why? So that we know what it means to be a servant. And if in that sense the Yetzias Mitzrayim is not so much a liberation as it is a change of ownership. Because we are no longer servants to Paro, we are servants to the Rebbeinu Shalom. And that means really committing ourselves with a devotion, with a self-sacrifice to the Rav and Hashem. And that's something which has to emerge from our Seder. Our Pesach Seder has to lead us to greater commitment. But at the same time, we have to understand, and this is an idea we've said many times, that to be a servant of the Rebbeinu Shalom is one of the best places to be. Because you have a master who's only concerned for your welfare. And that means ultimately you're working for yourself. So at the same time that Pesach is an evening that we commit ourselves to service to the Rebbeinu Shalom, it's an evening that we all find so tremendously gratifying, so tremendously warming. Bonding with family, with friends, sharing ideas, eating good food, even on that level. In other words, it's something which is very, very pleasurable, but on the other hand, it is also a commitment to divine service. And it's especially a commitment to divine service in an intergenerational sense. In other words, there's a recognition that our mission in this world is not going to be fulfilled in our lifetimes. You know, I once in my life had an experience where this really, it touched me. So it's one of these funny experiences. I was in Washington, D.C., and we were going to the various museums in the Smithsonian. So one of the museums is a museum of natural history. So as we walk in the lobby, there was an exhibit of about this fellow who was working on the Encyclopedia of American Moths. Now, it's no joke. First of all, not butterflies. Moths. What the difference is, don't ask me. These are moths. And not European moths, not Asian moths, not African moths, not even South American moths. The Encyclopedia of North American moths, of which apparently there are thousands of species. And his job was to document them, provide illustrations, and there's a whole video about this person's work. Now, the interesting thing about a moth is you can't photograph a moth, because when you, if you use a flash, the light totally distorts the coloring of the wings of the moth. So therefore, all the illustrations have to be hand painted of these thousands of species of moths. So, in the interview with this fellow, they asked him, when do you anticipate finishing this work? And he says, and when I heard that, I said, this will be finished in my lifetime. He's only started. Someone's going to have to carry on after. The next generation, the next
legacy.
Generation. And down the road, somebody will finish this Encyclopedia of North American Moths. Then maybe someone else will start the South American and the butterflies and so on and so forth. But the point is that when I saw that, I said, it's really, for us, it's the same thing. Whereas our mission, the mission of Klal Yisrael, will not necessarily be fulfilled in our lifetime. It certainly wasn't fulfilled in the lifetimes of our forebears. Because each person added something, each person contributed. Another brick in the structure. And it's standing with us. It might not happen in our lifetime. Halavai Mashiach should come. We're making our contribution. We're serving as a link in the chain. But our commitment is to make that contribution, even if we're not going to see the payros, we're not going to see the fruits of it in our lifetime. We're committed to this historical development, which will culminate ultimately with Mashiach's coming. And Pesach is especially a time for charging the next generation. There's such an emphasis on telling the story to your children, transmitting values to the next generation, and more than any other night of the year. This is the night for education, and that's because we recognize that our commitment to Judaism can't be just something which is our thing. It has to be something that will be carried on successive generations, and the night in which we charge our children is this night. So it's a very, very, very special night, but you have to remember that the message we are transmitting is that really it is a night of preparation. It's tremendous enlightenment. We're going to have to reclaim that enlightenment as we work towards Shavuot, and that really is the goal. Whatever God provides us here is merely in advance. It's something He gives us gratis to whet our appetites. But really, what we're meant to achieve is going to be during this preparation of Sfira, Shavuos, Kabbalah, Torah, in our carrying this forward for future generations. So it's a big, big challenge. And it's a challenge that we'll only rise to if we give it some forethought. The Seder and Pesach generally will only be as meaningful as you make it. And that requires a lot of thinking of what can I do and how can I do it. And I think if you apply yourself and think, you'll find ways. You'll find methods of making it meaningful. But it's worthwhile exerting the effort. What can be achieved, again, on a Pesach is far beyond anything else we can achieve any other day of the year. And it's certainly a opportunity which is worth taking advantage of. Everyone should have a Chag Kosher v'Sameach. Needless to say that next week, Monday night, we'll be at the Seder. So it should be
the chocolate
very meaningful.
At the chocolate mousse, she's made little animals, frogs and things. And when her grandchildren answer the question, she throws them a frog and a locust.
I just remember one story someone told me that once was a fellow. He was at his grandfather's Seder, and he had a question. He asked a question. The grandfather raised his hand and said, "No questions. This is the Pesach Seder." And of course, that's really the opposite. It's the time that questions should be encouraged discussion. Hopefully, we'll have the insight to be able to answer the questions. But everyone should have a Chag Kosher v'Sameach, should be a kosher holiday and a happy holiday. They say that there was a certain Rebbe that used to wish for Pesach it should be a happy Pesach. When we get to Purim, it should be a kosher Purim. That's what's idea. So this Pesach will still be kosher. No doubt about it. Everyone is cleaning and checking and searching for chametz. So kosher it'll be. The question will be happy. Right? After your nerves are frazzled, so it should be happy. This Purim will certainly be happy. No doubt about that. Because it will be kosher. That's a different question.